All right. Welcome to this afternoon session. Good to see many known faces. Savani, Jesper, and I, we want to talk to you in this afternoon about D365 for Operations deployment options. Savani is the program manager for deployment options in general. Then Jesper is basically, I would say, the project owner for both cloud and edge and hybrid. I'm from the platform side, the project owner. And together we kind of try to make this work and give you this so-called local business data, aka on-premise release, right? And we also try to give you a thing called Cloud plus Edge, and what all this will be, we talk to you a little more just in a minute. At any point in time, if you have questions, just let us know. I think we have 1 hour, 15 minutes. Let's use the time. Let's get as much knowledge shared as possible. So the agenda today is, so we first want to talk a little bit about generally the 3 main deployment options we are planning on having, which one we have right now. And we drill down into all kind of details there. We also have 2 demos. So for that cloud plus edge deployment, we have a demo of the data synchronization, how it will work. We'll also tell you what currently doesn't work and the struggles we have a little bit there. We show you the setup AX running on Service Fabric, unless the demo crashes in the last 10 minutes till I get to that slide. So then we show you the trial offer and talk a little bit about the different paid offerings. And then we show you a little bit about Express Route. All right. So going forward, on the left-hand side, you see the cloud. That's all what you know. Our current deployment option, which honestly, if you see from a company policy and strategy point of view, this is what we want to keep pushing. If you listen to any speech of Satya, then obviously he says, well, we are a cloud-first, mobile-first company. So we'll definitely will keep our primary focus on that left deployment option. And it will get more and more fully managed. So our goal will keep the same. We want to have short implementation cycles, a fully managed experience. But we also acknowledge that this is not basically, with our current market and with the ERP market, this is not the only deployment option which we can live with. There's just many requirements which benefit from other deployment options, like switching completely to the right-hand side. We call it local business data. Well, I say as nicely, aka on-premise, right? So we'll deliver a full on-premise release. This release will have some certain connections to the cloud, and what that will be, we'll tell you later. But it will fulfill many of the there will be no customer data sent into the cloud. There will be no PII shared. So we can say it will fulfill a lot of the very strict requirements certain countries have. For example, particularly Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. They have very strict privacy requirements. So and if you have a company with a business scenario which would fall into that, then that would be a possible option for you. And then in the middle, the cloud plus edge. Let me explain that a little bit. So at first we called that hybrid deployment because we say, well, it's technically a hybrid. So you have your data in the cloud, but you have also parts of your operations running on-premise. Parts of these operations would be, for example, well, you have your shop floor on-premise, but you do your whole fiscal year closing and everything else in the cloud. So how did we get to Edge? Well, if you read about distributed computing, and if you read about high volume computing, then there's a new, I would say, trending word called edge computing. And that's basically, instead of just using something like a distributed computing cluster, like for example Hadoop might be a term you're very familiar with, now you have multiple disconnected or only somewhat connected distributed computing clusters. And that's what's called edge computing, right? And that is basically seen from the point of view, and why I'm explaining all this is because it explains what we see there, one of the business values of this cloud plus edge. Essentially, you can calculate massive amounts of data. And now, if you look at the AX historically, let me just ask in the room, who of you ever had to deal with like a multi-instance implementation? That's quite a lot of you. If you think about a multi-instance implementation, well, the integration between these multiple instances, the master data management setup, if you had any defining maybe which instance is your master instance, and so on and so on, you've been there, you've seen it. That takes a lot of implementation time for fulfilling certain country requirements, for fulfilling certain scalability requirements. So we figured this cloud plus edge concept essentially through breaking out individual calculation nodes. We give AX some federated scale capabilities in which you can suddenly calculate certain parts of your workload on these edges. And that will obviously, besides helping with particular data residency requirements, also help you like have a single instance but scale to massive amounts of workloads. So now we have like a little bit of details on each of the different deployment options. Cloud, it's important to notice that, so we have like, I think you have been probably in the keynote with Sri, and I think we have like, whatever he said is right, whatever I said is just my current estimate, right? We have 100 customers on AX right now, plus minus maybe 5. Probably 200 more to come very soon, and that's all cloud customers. So AX is actually growing rapidly into the cloud. So as I said before, what the benefit of the cloud is if you have no particular requirements for being on premise, you can make use of all the tools we build, like LCS in full. You can make use of if you don't need too much customizations, you can make use of a very short implementation cycle. And your go-to-market and your go-to-production is very, very short, very quick. And you are always up to date. We are basically working very hard on automatically updating the cloud. For sure, that will not work very fast to AX application. The AX application will, for quite a while, follow a slower update cadence. But then, at a certain point in time, we want to basically be able to roll out updates almost fully automatic. So on the platform, on the kernel, we are very close to do that. We are probably like 2-3 releases away. But very soon, if you are in the cloud, if you're in a fully serviced system, it's kind of like, I would say we try to make it as worry-free for every customer as possible. Yeah, that's basically our main goal, to work towards that. So that's how the cloud looks like. Essentially, you have your HTML5 client, and then basically you have all your databases, all your features and functionality in a central cloud deployment. Then all the configuration, customization data is in the cloud. Your whole dev and ALM story, your application lifecycle management is the cloud. Now we say, okay, now let's go to the next deployment options, cloud and edge, where we start breaking individual workloads out. So let me describe how a typical edge might look like. It's actually easier to start with this slide. So you will still have a central cloud deployment, and how the whole data sync and everything will work, We have a few slides later on, so we'll drill down into that. But then you basically break out functional parts of that, where you say, oh, let me have, for example, my production on an edge, or let me have a production side A and a production side B on different edges. Or you have your inventory, your warehouse management on two different sides, and you maybe even want to calculate MRP on these different sides. And instead of like waiting, for example, and sequencing MRP runs, you can do all of these things suddenly in parallel, because you literally would sit, for example, in 3 different data centers. So in my current sample, well, I have my main cloud instance, and I have 2 different edges. And to some extent, we have that already working. We have solutions for number sequences and system sequences. I mean, when you look at that concept, you probably all kind of problems you might have in your mind what we have to solve, and that's quite a few. System sequences, number sequences, synchronization, the way in which we synchronize data up and down, how we segregate the data or separate the data from each other, and all of these things. So we are working towards solutions for all of that, and have solutions for most of them actually already. So benefit of that is you get the beauty of the cloud, you get powerful new features we implement there. So if you listen to Shree's keynote, he probably told you that, well, we spend quite a lot of time on building systems of records, and we're quite happy with how our systems of record work, aka Dynamics AX or D365 for operations. But now we want to build systems of intelligence on top. So we invent many new features which involve artificial intelligence, machine learning. Some samples would be retail, for example, their upsell suggestions, or the demand planning. All of these are samples. All of these invention we continue in the cloud, and will not make them available on premise unless it just works, right? So things like, for example, if you want to have a data warehouse and you go on premise, you would need to bring that on your own, for example, and things like that. So we talk a little more about just in the next slide about that. So, so the benefit is in this Cloud Plus Edge, you have all these powerful AI, ML features we are working on available, continuously updated. You have the same application lifecycle, and you have the same, basically, lifecycle management. A lot of the great features which makes the cloud very valuable. So essentially, what we say here, the best of both worlds. This is what you will have is that. On the local business data side, that's what we call the on-premise release. Well, first of all, some organizations say, for my business or for my internal policy, it's just non-negotiable. I don't want to store my data on the cloud. Full stop. And that's justified and correct and good. And that's why we said, okay, let's provide such a local business data on-premise deployment option. Then with that, we also solve some, yeah, please.
Is the decision as to whether an entity or whether data is stored on the edge of the cloud, is that for a whole data area or not?
Yes. So the question is the decision where the data resides, if it's on an edge or in the cloud, based on the data area identity? The answer is, in the current design, yes. So for version 1, and there's a lot of problems with that, I guess, you can think of. So for many scenarios, the right way of separating the data, let's be honest, would be, for example, a concept like site. But on the other hand, we need to see that implementing another data abstraction in AX, if you know the AX data model, is quite costly. So you know probably we have 2 leading columns in the database already, also known as the partition and the data area ID. Well, we work on getting rid of the partition, but then getting something like a site in there, right, would add another layer of abstraction, would make possible SQL calls slower. It drags a lot of performance and reliability impacts to add such a field. So we said for V1, we want to bind it to the data area ID. And I personally think that some of you will, when they start implementing Edge, maybe implement the data already almost like a site and then work around the issues with that. But for now, that's how we decided. So for the local business data, and Jesper will drill down into more of the details, what runs where and how the data flows. The key to remember is none of your data gets sent into the cloud unless you decide so. Also, our telemetry will work very, very restricted on it. Essentially, our telemetry will emit only usage data and then data to light up basically some of the LCS troubleshooting experience, and that's it. So there will literally be none of the customer data being transferred in any way. So that's one of the key parts to it, which should help you then if you go for local business data. It should help you to actually set up very easily like compliant installations in any country of your choice. Let's look a little bit at how the general picture will look like. So you have your on-premise on the left-hand side, where you connect with the HTML5 client. All of your data is basically local. Some of the telemetry data and some of the configuration data gets moved up into the cloud. And then from the cloud down, the ALM cycle will work like that. You will have some sort of like an on-premise sandbox environment, and obviously your production environment. But parts of the ALM story will be in the cloud. So first, you create code. This code from Visual Studio will basically create a package which is then applicable to Service Fabric. And why Service Fabric, I told you that in just a minute. And basically the whole deployment flow of fixes and the application lifecycle management will be LCS driven. Updates will also be LCS driven. So we want to keep basically the cloud approach to ALM. And we want to still say, okay, with a few tweaks you can enable some of the rich reporting experiences, but in the cloud with your own subscription. So I think what this deployment will give you is also a nice bridge between, okay, maybe in 5 years we want to be in the cloud because it has a lot of advantages for me, like less maintenance, less worry. And this environment can be a good bridge for you. So why Service Fabric? So in this new deployment model, we decided to basically set up most of the middle tier components on Service Fabric. So the database, obviously, SQL Server 2016, which when you install that and deploy that, you have to set that up in a high availability cluster, right, or in a Hadron setup. And after you've done that, you need at least 3 nodes of Service Fabric. So because the minimum Windows 2016 Service Fabric cluster is 3 nodes. That's where that 3 nodes come from. And then on these 3 nodes, you will install, basically you will have a service running, which is the areas, management reporter will run on Service Fabric, SSRS, we have a prototype for running on Service Fabric. So all of these components will run mostly on Service Fabric. Retail, we try to move it on Service Fabric, the retail server, the cloud POS, all of these things. How far we will be able to do that toward our GA date. Our GA date for that is 6/15/2017 right now. That's a different question. So depending on that, there might be a few more Windows Server down the line, right? And anyway, you will have that. If you think about, well, how will I size that? How will I set up that hardware? It will work very, very similar as in AX 2012 in regards to sizing. You need to think of, okay, how many hundreds of thousands or thousands transaction lines an hour do I have? What load might that be on the database? It'll work very, very similar. With one addition, you probably by now all know the subscription estimate and LCS. In AX 2012, that would give you like a recommendation for an infrastructure layout. So we want to bring that back for AX7 on-premise, right, or D365 for operations on-premise. We'll give you like an infrastructure estimator in LCS, which tells you, okay, we think you roughly need that for this deployment. And then depending on your volume, that can be 3 or 4 or 5 nodes in a service fabric cluster setup. So we have that actually working. Oops, let me just, that goes to the first demo. So that is, yeah, the X client here running on Service Fabric, the AOS essentially running on Service Fabric. So pretty fast, pretty responsive. And that's essentially a 3-node cluster, whereas we use only 2 nodes in this service AX SF type. And then obviously we have a bunch of little technical challenges here to overcome. So in Service Fabric, you always define a primary and a secondary node. So obviously we need to fix network load balancing. In our newest prototype, we have that, or in our newest work item, we have that already. We just didn't manage to stand up a new demo environment since I last demoed that, which was like 2 weeks back. So, but technically, you would need more than one of these basically, of these nodes here to have proper load balancing in Service Fabric. So this is like a non-load balanced environment. Obviously, in the final one, you will have a proper load balanced Service Fabric deployment for the AOS. And you have different roles. Don't get irritated by the names. Essentially, even though that says SQL and client or something like that, it's all AOSs. We just took basically the standard deployment way from LCS, which gives you these random names. So it's all AOSs, what you see here. So yeah, so we are quite far. We have fixes for parallelization. We have already a good part of the setup.exe, which will basically make up the future way of installing. I say it will be more LCS driven. There will probably be like a service on each of these machines, which like discovers new updates. So that's basically the actual Service Fabric demo. And I think with that, I would give over to Jesper,
all right,
who wants to talk a little bit about hybrid and Cloud Edge. Oh. So the local deployment, does it still authenticate against Azure Active Directory? No, we use ADFS. The local deployment, so there's one thing up here, if you look at that. So we say we support you for 16 hours offline with this environment. So if you have 0 internet connection, we will support you for up to 16 hours. And what does this mean? Will the environment stop working after 16 hours? No, it won't. Can you be completely offline if you want to be completely detached? Technically, you could. But the whole cloud part of the equation on the right-hand side of the screen will obviously not work. So we just say the whole telemetry and the rich LCS experience, the update experience, after 16 hours, it will fall possibly apart. So you can be offline completely for 16 hours. If you really wanted to, you could be offline later, longer. You could be offline for a week. But then we don't guarantee for any recovery, and we don't guarantee for the actual cloud part to catch up. So it'll be a manual support request, DSE involvement, a lot of these things. With that?
all right, thank you. So I'm just going to start out to save you all from repeats. I'm assuming everybody saw the demo I did in the keynote. If you didn't see it, raise your hand. And yeah, that's what I thought. So I'm not going to repeat that. But also, because what you saw there was obviously a scenario that mostly worked, which is great for a keynote and makes Sri happy. And now he believes that we're done. But the thing is, as Christian said, of course, when we take and split an AX deployment out over multiple instances and sync stuff up magically on the back end, things don't just work like that. There's some challenges. Anybody that has done an integration project in a multi-instance environment will attest to that, I'm sure. So I'm going to show a couple of different patterns and explain a little bit more about what the hybrid setup is and how it works. So I've got the same environment that I used for the demo this morning, the neck projector. I was expecting something that, let me see if I can make it show up. Otherwise I'll just steal that cable.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's it. You want to have that?
It's sure is doing something. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so I have this same environment, and as I mentioned, this is true. We demoed it a couple of times before that, so if any of you have seen it before, that was sort of an emulator environment we did to test it out. What I'm showing here is real running bits, so whatever's here is checked in and is in the latest build of the product. The deployment I have is a 3-instance deployment. It has one master environment. We tend to call it Cloud plus Edge. But really, in a Cloud plus Edge setup, any of the deployments can be in the cloud. The only one that must be in the cloud is the master deployment that we usually call the cloud. But any of the edges, or all of them, can be in Azure data centers. They can be in the same Azure data center or in other data centers across the world. They can also be totally in the customer's own server room, or it could be at a partner's hosting facility in a data center that's close by. All of it will connect up. In the example I have here, both my cloud and my edge is in a cloud deployment, but that doesn't really change the way that they sync up and the challenges that brings. So I mentioned also that, and Christian reiterated that we separate by data area ID. So once you choose that you want an edge deployment, you choose which of the legal entities, the data areas, that you want to home on that edge. And it can be one or as many as you choose out of the total of all of the data areas that's in the installation. The cloud master deployment will continue to contain all of the data areas and all of the changes that is done on the edges where the data areas are homed on an edge environment will aggregate, and so you will have the superset of all data available in the cloud. Some of that data will be read-only in the cloud, and some of that data will be maintainable and maintained in the cloud. There's pretty much 3 different ways that we treat what entities you can write to in any of these deployments. There's some that are only writable in the cloud and will sync back to the edge. That's typically most of what's considered shared data. There's some that are only writable on the edge and will sync back up to the cloud. That's most of the entities that are company-striped and are operational of nature. And then there's some that you either can write to in both and they never sync, or you can write to safely in both and they do sync. The 2 different... yes, there's a question there. Yes. Yes. And I will show that as well. The in-between thing, some examples of that is that, like temporary data, you can write to that in any of the instances, and we don't need to sync it. So those will be writable on all of the environments, and we just don't sync the data. We'll basically not write it up. An example of where we could support writing in both instances and do sync it is that if we know that the nature of that entity is that we only add, and the stuff that we add is non-conflicting if it's added from different legal entities, for example. And there's some questions. Yes, I think we have time for it, so let's take them now.
Yes, I have a question. When you start this, you may start with 1 or 2 data area IDs. But how does that kind of work out as you go? Like, you start with demo data, you have 20 data area IDs. But then when you pick one, what happens? How does that data get moved to one of these edge systems?
Yep.
Or if you start with, I want to add a new data area, how do you make that decision? And then the data gets, does it sync up somehow?
Yes, it does. So the question is, where do I start out? Do I have to lay out my whole topology up front, or can I just start out and choose as I go along? Where do each of these data area IDs belong? And our recommendation will usually be start out with everything in the cloud on the master instance, and then you can drop down one or several data area IDs to an edge deployment whenever you choose. And yes, we will first stand that up and do the initial priming with data, and then after that, the sync will be going on. We're also envisioning you can move the other way, so you can stop having a data area ID on the edge, and you can move it up to the cloud. That's going to be even simpler because the cloud already contains the superset of the data. So that's going to be flexible. There was a question in the back over. Yeah. So the question is, what about the entities that are not striped by data area ID, but where you still want them to execute on the edge due to some of the typical work? Could be batch, you mentioned workflow, and so on. That is a very good question, and you can approach me afterwards with the answer, then we'd be happy to hear it. No, that's a good example of some of the stuff that we're working through at the moment with hybrid. We have some slides later where we'll show you that is work in progress, but they sort of map out across all of the different deployment options what works on each of them, what works but with some annotations, and what is not supported. And we can go through that in a little more detail. Yeah. So question is, what happens with all of the cross-company stuff, cross-company views, and so on? And in increasing grades of frustration, the following happens. First of all, anything where you have the data areas deployed on the same node, either edge or cloud, you can, of course, view cross-company. That's good for the cloud, so the cloud can always see everything. It can't necessarily update stuff until we've fixed it, but that's pretty fixable. If you want to do something on a node, or sort of do stuff across nodes, reserve inventory across data areas that are on separate nodes, that's slightly less easy to solve, and that's one of the things where we might come out with the first versions with a couple of unsupported scenarios in that case, but we're going to work through it. The sequence we're working through this is, and that's why if you've read Sri's blog post on this, it mentions coming out with what we call a warehouse workplace and a production workplace. And so we're basically going to validate scenarios in those areas and say, okay, we've validated this, now we know this works. It's as I'll show you, I'll get to the demo here, stuff doesn't break as such. There's just scenarios, it doesn't screw up your system. There's just scenarios that are less flexible and nice, and there's some that's simply unsupported. But the system will stop you, as I'll show you, because we've put sort of security layers in place to do that.
So one thing to add to what Jesper says is we plan on having a client which is connected where you would automatically go to write forms, but that doesn't really solve the question about cross-company features. But technically the client should know the right site where it should present data from. But still, I think the cross-company stuff will take some time after the initial preview releases to figure out. So even in initial previews, which we plan right now, around 6:15, might slip. But even in these things will not be figured out yet. So just that will take us some time to solve these things. Go through these things.
So I propose I'll just run through the demo. I see there's many more questions. We actually have, I think it's the next session after this, right? There's a feedback session. That'll be all Q&A, and we'll be happy to go into a lot more details in that. Maybe we're covering some of the questions. So let me this is the same environment you saw this morning, Green is obviously on-premise. Blue is the cloud. I know clouds are not blue, but that's sort of how it's worked out, and now we can remember that. So let me show you something. Let's introduce a new product, something we all know, runs across data areas when you want to release it. You introduce a new product master. It's shared across all companies. So what you see is when I go onto my edge environment, my local environment, if you want, there's stuff that I can't do. I can't actually create a new product master here. That has to be done in the master environment. So I can go here to create my new product. Let's do that. Create a new one. We'll call it TC02. Tech conf. Like that. Now, you'll notice that anybody could actually do what I just did. I'm on a machine that's connected to the internet. I have access to both environments. We're envisioning that most users will be limited to ever only have to know about and care about one environment. So a guy working in the warehouse, picking, shipping items and stuff, like I showed in this morning's session, he would only have to know about the edge environment, all of his processes. He's limited by his role anyway. It all works and it all runs on that edge environment. Somebody that's a little more sort of high level, maybe cuts across, doing stuff across multiple entities, will have to know about the two environments. We did consider, as you can see, it's all just URLs, right? So it's one URL that opened my product master screen on the cloud environment. It's a different URL that opened it on the edge. But there's no reason that there couldn't be a link in here in my edge environment that said new product master, and it would just take me to the blue one. In that case, we might not make it blue, but also make it green, and this guy wouldn't even know that he was now running against a different instance, since it's all live on the internet. What we've thought is that in the first iterations of this, it's better to be explicit, so we will make it very obvious that there's two environments and that you choose between them, kind of like when you switch data area ID up here. We envision you kind of switch environments. Going forward, we're thinking we can integrate this more and more and maybe be more seamless, and eventually you don't even have to know. You just get sent to the right deployment where you can do stuff. So let me I'll just release this product now. I just created. Oh, I think I actually have to set a couple of, oops. Let me just set this. Okay. Now release the product. Uh-oh.
About the things which break.
Yeah, that was actually unfortunate. Let me just see if I can redo that, because that's supposed to work. And it do the presenters. I'll do the presenter's famous speech here and say it worked this morning. Let's do this. Maybe it was because I clicked crazily all over. No. It broke. That's unfortunate.
A little bit of Murphy's Law, I guess.
Yeah. Anyways, what was supposed to happen, of course, is that I could release this product. But, no. This was actually supposed to work. No, it's...
Can you release it from the cloud?
Yes.
Does it have to be released from the edge?
Yeah, we can release it from the edge, so let's do that. That's a good... Yeah. Well, I was supposed to be able to release it from the cloud to the data areas that are homed in the cloud. But you have a good point, because I actually did test that I could release it from the edge earlier. So why don't we try and see that? We're free rolling here in the demo. So I called it TC something. Here's my TC. Maybe we'll try it with the TC02. So first of all, This is now synced. So you can see that my TCO3 is not visible here on my edge node, but my TCO2 is. So that was the one I created before that I kind of couldn't release. Yeah. Yeah. So the sync technology we're using is called SQL Data Sync. It's actually not GA yet. And currently their sort of advised SLA, if you want, for syncing changes across environments is 5 minutes. We've tweaked it here so it syncs within 2 minutes, which is nicer for a demo. But there was a reason that they picked 5 minutes because they've sort of verified that that's what, in a high volume environment, seems to make sense. So think some minutes. Yeah. So let's try and release it here. Thank you to that gentleman for that advice. And actually, that does work. So I'll release it. And now I want to release it to USMF and USPI. I'll click Next. Next. And I hear some mumbling in the room. Probably some people picked up that this is not going to work either. And that's correct. But this one time it was intentional. The other not working was not intentional. So you see what happens here is it says operation completed, but it also says one or more products cannot be released. Validate open product releases, blah, 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 blah. So the system sort of gracefully stops me. Admittedly, the error message could have been a little more descriptive, but that's because we haven't actually worked through that yet. But you see the product was released to USMF. So the security systems in place and the configuration layer we've added for hybrid stops my access to USPI because USPI is not homed on my edge environment here and gives me the error message. Obviously, this is another example of something that we want to work through and make more smooth so that I can, and ideally it would be from the cloud instance, release to any of my data area IDs and it would propagate to the right edge nodes. Let me end.
Just a short addition to what Jesper says. Think of like 3 possible like tricky scenarios. I mean, there's like non-header scenarios, right? Like batch jobs and these things, workflows. Then there's like things like cascading delete actions, which might go from master data to like row level data. And then there's things like where you have, for example, the purchase requisition where you have a shared header but local lines, so the lines are going per data already. And then the product release. So for all of these scenarios, obviously, we have to work through all the possible hiccups which you could get, which one of them we have just seen.
And while Christian bought me some time by talking, the data sync now happened the other way in the morning session. I actually only showed data syncing from the edge to the cloud master. Now we just did the master product on the cloud instance that synced to the edge. Then we did the release product on the edge that created a released product in USMF. That has now synced, so I'm now, as you can see, in released product in USMF on the cloud, and that product has showed up here. So two-way sync. There's a few other things. This is the last thing I'll show, and I'll end on something that does break. So if we go in here and look at production orders to release, there's just simply some things that we're trying to work through and discover and test where we don't even really know that deep down there's some code that maybe spans across entities that are homed on cloud or between data area, the striped data, and shared data. So if I go to this production order and try to run an operation here that calculates some requirements, what you'll see is, again, I get an error here, requirement calculation, blah, 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 because access denied to table, blah, 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 task bundles. And so this is a configuration that we haven't yet gotten through and figured out how to solve. We're going to run into multiple of these. But I want to again highlight sort of that the middle layer that we've put in place does its job. It catches this illegal operation, throws an error, and we just need to rework the application and figure out how to fix that up. Yeah. Yes. It is. That's why we are so the question was if Rec ID is synced. So yes, and we have done everything. And in this first setup, as I mentioned when I talked about what types of entities we sync which way, we are trying everything we can to not do two-way sync for the same entities. So there's always mastered in one place and only synced one way. And only when we can detect that it's not risky are we going to support either two-way sync or no sync on them. That's the plan. Yeah. Yeah.
The configurations of all the configurations that you the same then, or are you planning to do this different? Because at the moment the problem is if you run across different regions.
Yeah.
Often for example, a lot of customizations for India.
Yeah.
They have some issues when they also have, for example, Brazil or Germany on.
Yes. But that's right. The question is, do all of the instances need to be identical, basically, and updated and have the same changes applied and so on? And the answer is yes. In this setup, the Cloud plus Edge, it's one solution. So when you apply an update, it's applied in the cloud, and then it's actually automatically propagated to the edges. We're working on allowing the definition of some service windows that allows you for a short time to be a little out of sync. But the basic principle is it's identical installation. So yes, there could be some challenges with what you just described. So in the interest of time, we should probably move on and switch back to the deck. Yeah, so this pretty much summarizes some of the things we just been through, and it's the exact same table that's in Sri's blog post. It just repeats a lot of the configuration significant differences that Christian talked through in the beginning slides, and it also mentions availability. So we are releasing Cloud plus Edge in June, late June.
6:50.
So, yeah, 6:50.
As late as we are allowed to.
Yeah. Along with that, we're expecting to have previews of the first Cloud plus Edge deployments, but that's scheduled to be available in the second half, and again, late calendar year 2017. And that's not because we believe we'll have most of the technical stuff available, but it's to give us and ISV's time to work through the challenges of the scenarios that actually do either break or need fixing up to work smoothly in this scenario. So just also a repeat of what the different deployment options look like. The local business data is essentially supporting a disconnected on-premise when it comes to data. You're still connected for servicing and telemetry, but no business data leaves the premises. In the multi-node hybrid, which is the most, you could say, flexible and action-packed solution that pretty much can support best of both worlds. Everything can be in the cloud as much as you like, and wherever you have a need for it, you can either scale out in the cloud or you can scale out with local servers to solve for any challenges you come across in terms of connectivity, local legislation, or anything else that you need solved. As you can also see, a lot of the cloud intelligence options are not available in the local business data offering. Obviously, they're out there and they're available, so anybody that in 2012 could wire up Power BI against the local server can choose to do so. But none of the automatic stuff and the integrated Power BI that you saw in Sri's keynote, the integration to CDS, etc., is not supported. I've shown the middle version. We haven't actually talked about that. I'm getting a timing call here. Yeah, so I'll move a little fast. I just want to mention the single edge deployment. We're looking into supporting that as the first previews we put out, because as long as there's only one edge, the syncing becomes way simpler. And in fact, you could easily imagine moving from a local business data version to a single edge cloud-enabled environment where you get all of the benefits from Power BI and getting your data in the cloud, but all operations and pretty much all actions, including some of the ones that was otherwise split across the different instances in my example, would go against the edge, the local server. All right. I'm not going to talk through these because then we're going to run out of time, but we can bring it back up, I guess, in the feedback sessions that we have.
We have like a session right after that, half an hour later, like it's 3:30. So please feel free to come there, and then we can discuss what it's meant to be for that.
Yeah. So this is what I mentioned. It pretty much maps out for each feature area specific features and where they're either not supported, as you can see in the example with some of the intelligence and Power BI features here not supported on local business data. It's so that we can be as precise and explicit as possible about what you can expect to work and not work. They're in the deck. Deck should be on the server for the conference here, so you can download it and look through it. And you're welcome to ask questions. There's a similar map for client. There's a similar map for application features. And we're working on getting that for all of the different areas. And the final thing I want to mention is we're also working on a cookbook. Those of you that's been on AX for a while knows about the concept. So there'll be a hybrid application cookbook. It'll pretty much map out all of the different scenarios, some of the ones that I mentioned, with suggested solutions for how to refactor and work around stuff that, for example, spans something that goes intercompany, and you want that working in a hybrid environment. That cookbook will be available sometime this spring, along with an ISV preview of the hybrid functionality. All right.
Thanks, Jesper.
You do have 15 minutes. Do you need the... we'll just switch it.
Present from here and then demo from here.
Yeah. For the demo, we can switch.
Oh, you're starting here. Sorry.
Thanks, Christian and Jesper. That was, now with all the exciting options that you have, I'll round out with what we currently have and how we are making the cloud even more compelling. So I'll start with the trial. In case you guys have not seen it, I'll do a short demo, and I will encourage you guys to take a look. It's a quick elevator pitch for you if you want to demo what AX7 is to somebody in a coffee shop. This is a great experience. It's a 5x5, which is 5 seconds to sign up and 5 minutes to wow. It's a guided tour. You must be very familiar with the task recordings. So the task guides, it's a task guide experience. It is available localized, multiple localized languages. What's interesting about the trial is it's a fully platform as a service feature set. It's on Azure Service Fabric, which is what led to the innovations that we are seeing in the local business data, where we are using Azure Service Fabric as well. What it does is it enables us to save a lot of money in terms of in terms of COGS, and we use elastic pools on the cloud. Obviously, in the edge local business data, you'll be using the on-prem SQL, but then the compute, the AOS, is on the Azure Service Fabric. Jumping to a quick demo. Sorry, I need to switch. Which one? Did we switch it? There's a button somewhere here, right? I hope a lot of you have tried out this trial experience. If you've not, then let me show you. Thanks. This is our Dynamics 365 for Operations page. Just go to get started. And it will launch you. Unfortunately, I don't have a new username, so I'm a return user here. It knows me. And there's multi-factor authentication. And it will launch me into the AX dashboard in just a second. It says that I am already in, and it takes me right to my company. So this is a shared company solution where each user gets one company, and it will launch you into your own company when it actually gets in there into the AX dashboard. Meanwhile, I have to switch machines, so we'll probably have to wait here for a second. Or I do have it open already. I don't want to refresh this right now. Let's see what is done. There you go. And you can then it's a task recorded experience, and you can walk your customers through the experience of AX, what AX is like.
You know what is really cool? Because how long did it take you to show anyone AX? Like 4 or 5 months ago, right?
Yes.
You had to have a demo environment somewhere. You had to maintain it somehow. Maybe you had to have a subscription. Well, you want to show it right now? Well, you say, well, go log in there. Sign up for trial. Takes you like 2-3 minutes. So I think that's what a real cool part about the trial experience is. You can just show it like right away without much effort in a good experience.
Yep, and very efficiently managed as well. So with that, if you really needed to show a customized version of AX, you guys do know that you can get the demo boxes on your subscriptions. And once you go through the implementation cycle and you're all happy with AX and what AX can do for you, what you get when you actually get an enterprise offer of AX, the Dynamics 365 for Operations Plan 2. We get in the Microsoft managed subscription. AX is completely managed and operated by Microsoft, as you all well know. In the Microsoft subscription, you guys have access to one demo build, tier 1 sandbox, one multi-box, and one production topologies. So the one tier 1 sandbox, the first tier 1 sandbox that you get, you can choose to use as a demo box or a build box. Most people have it as manage it as a build box, and so you can connect it to VSTS, manage your builds, and use it for Dev ALM so that you can actually push your builds out through sandbox and through production. In the multi-box, it is connected to SQL Azure. The demo box is a one-box VM with SQL on-prem on it. The multi-box is a truly multi-box where you get an AOS machine, a BI machine, and on SQL Azure. This one, you can actually use it for UAT. In the go live cycle, you'll be using it as an UAT, and then proceed to move to the production high availability system that is, again, managed and operated by Microsoft DSE, the service engineers. This is fully DR enabled. It is sized based on the number of user licenses, completely locked down. So it's very secure, and we can actually deliver on SLA for your service to keep it running all the time. This is a HA deployment architecture if you've not already seen it. It is a true, it's distributed, it has AOS, it has the BI machines which are used for SSRS reporting, and the retail service and MR service runs on it. It connects to the Azure AAD. Now, how do we secure it? one of the common questions that I get is, how do we secure this? This is completely on the cloud. It's on Azure. I want to connect to my on-premise system, and I want it to be secure. So we are doing, we are definitely aware of that, and we are doing a lot in order to make the cloud more compelling and more secure place to run your operations on. And for that, we are starting to, the deployment comes configured with NSGs, and we allow you to configure NSG rules. So your on-premise systems can talk to the AOS endpoints or the retail endpoints based on the NSG rules configuration. What is NSG? NSG is the network security group, which each VNet comes configured with. So you can choose to enable RDP and the endpoints to be accessible only from certain IPs, or pass only certain rules. So this is something that you can actually get on the Azure portal. You can go to the Azure documentation, and you'll be able to see this. So if you need help in getting that configured, we will help you out. So please reach out to us. And we are trying to get this into LCS as well, so that it will be self-serve. But for the moment, we are still figuring things out here with on how we can use this very effectively and make it self-serve. So this is how the NSG rules will be evaluated. So the first rule that wins is the one that will allow you to access the network or not. And if none of the rules match, then the packet will be denied. And lastly, the express route. This has been very popular as well because of our distributed nature of deployments all across US to China to Hong Kong and anywhere in between. So express route actually is a dedicated circuit that is available through Azure. It's an Azure service, and we enable D365 for operations on express route through public peering mode. Express route actually has multiple peering modes. One is the public peering, which is what we allow the traffic through. Private peering, we do not enable. Simply put, private peering is a VPN into your CorpNet to the Dynamics 365 for operations. We do not allow that for the valid reason that we cannot guarantee our SLAs because it's completely managed and operated by Microsoft. Microsoft peering is not really applicable in this case. It is more for the CRM online and for Office 365, SharePoint kind of connectivity to Azure. So how do we get set up through Express Route? You get set up through a network service provider. Please, Azure documentation has a ton of network service providers that are available in your particular region. So you can contact them and get set up completely separate from Dynamics 365 for operations. It is not, it's an Azure service as well. What do you need from us? You need to know where your deployment is, because what that does is that will enable you to actually make the decision as to whether you need a standard circuit or a premium circuit. A standard circuit is something that will actually enable you to connect within a geopolitical region. So let's say I'm in operation in Europe and my deployment is in Europe, then all I need is a standard circuit. But if I'm in Europe and my deployment is in US, then I will need a premium circuit. So that's something that you will need to know before you talk to your network service provider. One important note to make is, on the Express Route circuit, we will not enable connections going from Dynamics 365 for operations into your on-premise network. That's for security reasons, because you do not want to allow connections randomly from Azure to go into your on-prem network. So if you have any such customizations that need you to access your on-prem network, that has to go through internet. I guess this is the workflow. This is again available on the Azure documentation sites. How do you get set up with your network service provider? How do you get the physical connectivity? And then you actually set up the circuit and provide the S key. There's something called an S key, which is a GUID that we need to provide to the network service provider, and you will get enabled. They will establish NAT, network address translation rules, to make sure that your traffic goes from your on-prem network to the Dynamics 365 for operations deployment on this dedicated circuit. And once you start using Network Express Route, you'll see pretty fantastic latencies. We've had customers from China who are accessing East US2 deployment in under 250 milliseconds. And they've been very happy about it. So if you're having latency issues, then Express Route is a great place to start. With that,
so one point to the latency Savani just mentioned. At around 250 milliseconds is when you slowly and gently get latency issues with AX, with D365 for operations. So in the past, it would be probably 5 milliseconds. So now it's like anything between 250 to 300. So that's important to notice. So this express route can really increase the range you have to live with a single instance.
Yep. And it makes the cloud service much more compelling as well. With that, we open up to questions, if you want to get to questions before the feedback session too. Yeah.
The on-prem install, can I install that on my existing hardware, or will I need to purchase an appliance from an approved vendor?
Today, we are trying to let you repurpose your existing hardware. You do not have to purchase an appliance as of now. It may change, but for now it is not, right? Yeah.
Right.
We're trying our best to enable it.
You can definitely use your existing hardware, but we'll expect you to run on virtual machines, and then in a service fabric cluster. Yeah? Could you come closer forward? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question. Yeah.
What happens in on-prem if your sizing changes? For example, if you go AOS or service?
So what happens if you're on-premise and your sizing changes? So that goes a little bit into licensing. So we haven't finalized it yet, but it'll roughly work like that. You will buy first of all, we'll be living in a modern life cycle. That means we expect the kernel to be updated every year and the application to be updated at least every 3 years. Now, you will buy a software assurance together with your on-prem installation, and you will buy server licenses. So if you need to have more AOS, all you do is buy more server licenses. With server, I mean the AOS. That's all what will happen. So you can just scale as however you want. Any more questions? Yeah.
I saw in the one of the slides that shows for the MS subscription, you get 3 boxes. The demo, the bulk, the production.
Mm-hmm.
Can I increase it to more boxes? I'm expanding one for financial certification to be isolated away.
In the cloud?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how it works basically is right now you would talk to us basically, and usually we just provision another environment. So we know that there's sometimes a shortage in some certain scenarios right now with what we give you out of the box with the standard subscription. So it's in some cases you need to buy more. In some cases we also help you. It's not entirely. Yes.
You can purchase add-ons. Yeah.
Yeah. So in some cases you have to purchase. There was a question back there first. Oh, so the question is, what happens if the local system connects against Azure Active Directory? Well, it doesn't. We use ADFS. So we use the client's own Active Directory. So it should not be a problem. Yes?
You had one bullet point on an earlier slide about planned multi-instance federation for the cloud offering. Can you talk more about what you have planned there?
Multi-instance federation.
I'm not sure. So the question is, we have something about multi-instance federation. I'm not sure which slide you refer to. Maybe we can maybe go there. Yeah. You do you?
The table from Sri's.
This one? We'll find it. Oh, all right. Probably the very one, the first one.
This one?
It's probably, it can only be there's only one left.
There you go.
Yeah.
Oh, cloud.
Oh, yeah. So, okay, so that's another project we have where we say we want to have basically a good master data management story for the cloud where you can basically use multi-instances. Honestly, that's not really settled on if that will be just another implementation of hybrid, aka cloud plus edge, or if that will be something own. We haven't settled on that quite yet. Yeah. Yeah, please. Your question. Yeah.
There's a practical scenario that someone might come across, which is they have a single data area ID, single legal entity.
Just turn off the mic.
So what will be the difference between the local business data and AX2012 on-prem? Well, you will run on a new client. The AOS will run in IIS. So I'm telling you a few technical differences. You'll run in Service Fabric, which gives you higher availability and better higher availability options. You have the full feature richness of AX7, obviously. Everything what you have in AX7 is there, besides certain BI features, which are in the slide Jesper shown. And yeah, I think that would probably be some of the main. The licensing will work a little different, but that will be some of the highlights, I guess. Let's make that the last question, and then we meet on the other side.
Regarding the edge cloud solutions, so it's possible for you to have multiple edges that are running against local AD forests. So we basically have AD forests that they are authenticating against.
So the question is, can the edges run against different AAD forests? I think that is still TBD in our mind. We haven't gotten yet to detail that out yet. So we have just the basic ADFS working right now, and I'm kind of quite happy with that. So once we get more into the edge deployment, from an engineering point of view, we'll do that. All right. Well, thanks, and
Thank you.
please come and see us in the other room.